Well, good evening, everybody. Glad you could join us. Uh, we're at number 63, if you can believe that. Where's my co-teacher, the one that's the brains behind everything?
I've been sick, so everybody needs to cut me a little bit of slack because Keith made me sick last week. Oh, and one more thing, I gotta show you something.
Sweetie, check your
Before,
microphone. You're sounding tinny.
when we did the check before, you said I sounded fine.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, let
You
me check.
did. Check it again.
How's that?
Oh, much better. Much better.
Somebody wasn't paying attention on the check.
Well, I was just used to getting fussed at, so that's all I was hearing.
Well, I was going to show you something I had for last week, but I forgot to show it, so I'm going to show it right now.
Oh, my bride can come up with some of the cutest things. Thank you, sweet darling.
Did you see that birthday cake? It was like on fire from so many candles.
I saw it. So did everybody else.
Okay, good. All righty.
Well, everybody, we're so glad you could join us. We've already got several joining us live. Thank y'all. Appreciate you. Please subscribe, like, share. We're just trying to do the Lord's work here, and that's all our claim to fame is. But thank y'all. Your support just means the world. So, but Sonar's going to lead off tonight.
I am. I'm going to try to. We named this podcast Catching a Glimpse of the Invisible. And I had to put the Invisible Man on there. I thought maybe that might kind of ring in somebody's brain there, that when we say invisible, it's invisible, but that doesn't mean it's not there. So we want to look at 2 Kings chapter 6 tonight. We're starting with 6. And one of your favorite stories that you tell all the time, Keith, the floating axe head. Elisha's begun his ministry, and the guys, the company of prophets that he's with, they tell Elisha, they say, this place is too small for all of us. We have outgrown this place. We're willing to work for it. We'll go down by the Jordan, and I'm assuming where trees actually grow. And each of us can get a pole, and meaning they can get a beam and make a log or whatever, and we can build a place for us to meet. He says, go. And they say, well, come on, go with us. If it makes you happy, come on. He says, I will. And he goes with them. They went to the Jordan. They began to cut down these trees. And have you ever had an axe head fly off the end of your handle, Keith?
Oh, so many times I can't remember them all.
First of all, thank goodness nobody was hurt. But the unfortunate part is the axe handle flung into the water. The guy's standing there holding the pole and his axe head, and he says, I borrowed this axe. This is Joe's axe. He didn't even want me to take this axe. And I have flung it into the Jordan River. And so Elisha says, where did it fall? And he goes down there and he showed him the place. Elisha cut a stick and threw it in there, it says, and he made the iron float. Lift it out, he said, and the man reached out his hand and took it. Now, Key, why do you think this was? I mean, of course it's a miracle, and it may hold some special significance that, I don't know anything or I can't really put my finger on. But you know what? If nothing else, it is a comfort to know that God would be concerned with a request like this. Because I don't know if you've ever thought this, but you probably have. I have, that I shouldn't bother God with certain things. That's not God worthy.
Well, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 says, trust in the Lord with all thine heart. Lean not into thine own understanding. In all thy ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. He didn't say just bring me the big stuff. He didn't say just bring me the monumental things that, if you need to know, whether you, need to change jobs or whatever. He, think of it in terms of you're sitting at an intersection, and I mean, I've heard testimonies like this, and somebody saying, just something in me, and we're talking about Christians, something in me said I needed to, instead of going straight, I need to go right because I need to run by so-and-so and check on so-and-so. And, it turned out to be a very monumental thing. But
Yeah, he is definitely in the details of our lives. And our problems are not too small for him. He says his yoke is easy and his burden is light. I'm guilty of not placing big burdens on him, thinking I need to carry them myself.
Mm-hmm. Well, you and I were
much
talking
less.
today, and I said, humanism teaches us that we're at the top of the food chain. We want to explore space. It's all us. We want to improve, our standard of living. It's all us. You want to, fix this, fix that. Mankind and mankind's intellectual abilities can make it happen.
Yeah.
And that's humanism. That's not what God has taught from the dawn of time.
Well, this is certainly one of his early miracles. And I would say, every prophet must go through a certain period of testing, that his word cannot fall void. If he says this is God's word and this is going to happen, it has to happen. And just to show that
if it didn't happen,
the power of God dwelled on him.
Yeah.
Certainly every man standing there swinging one of those heavy axe heads had to have in his hand proof that God could do anything, that he was in the details. So,
well, and just miracles like this, think back to the time where to help Israel win a battle, I can't remember who's on. I think it was Moses, maybe, where his arms were lifted up, and Aaron and Caleb, or Aaron and Joshua came and held his elbows, and so he could keep his arms up. And as long as he kept his arms up, the sun didn't set, and it gave him time to win the battle. Then you've got another miracle. I mean, how much more miraculous? You think about it. How would we like to do a series of Sunday night studies where we study the miraculousness of God's creation? The fact that the earth is exactly the right distance from the sun, the moon is exactly the right distance from the earth, the orbits of the moon around the earth relative to. I mean, I can go for hours and talk about just creation is a miracle.
We might have to make room for that sometime, but not tonight.
Well, my point simply is, if God is a God of creation, and he was the author of creation, then, when he decides he's going to suspend the law of gravity, or he's going to suspend the spinning of the earth on its axis, why would we question that he could do that?
Donna says there's times she needs two believers to hold up her arms for sure when the battle seems hard.
That's a great line, Donna. Thank you so much.
Yes. Okay, let's go on and look at the next chapter 6. This is verses 8 through 23, where the king of Aram, which is Syria, we've talked about this, is frustrated that his battle plans are being revealed to Israel.
I want to go to the right, they're there. I want to go to the left, they're there. Yeah.
Who is the mole in this outfit? The scripture says, now the king of Aram was at war with Israel. And after conferring with his officers, he said, I will set up my camp in such and such place. The man of God sent word to the king of Israel, beware of passing that place. He warns them because the Arameans are going down there. So the king of Israel checked on the place indicated by the man of God. Time and time again, Elisha would warn the king so that he was on his guard in such places. This enraged the king of Aram. He summoned his officers and demanded of them, tell me, I say, who's the mole? But it's which, this is the way they said it, which of us is on the side of the king of Israel? None of us, my lord, said one of his offers. But Elisha, the prophet who's in Israel, he tells the king of Israel the very words you speak in your bedroom. He said, go find out where he is. He said, so I can send men and capture him. The report came back, he's in Dothan. Then he sent horses and chariots and a strong force there. They went by night and they surrounded the city. So, good morning. Elisha's servant panics when he realizes they're surrounded by the Aramean forces. But Elisha prays for his eyes to be open. It says, when the servant of the man of God got up and went out early the next morning, as I said, good morning, an army with horses and chariots had surrounded the city. Oh, no, my lord, what shall we do? The servant asked. And I want you to notice here, he's got a new servant. Remember the last servant he had? He's a leper. He's a leper now.
Yeah, he's an outcast now. He's not
up.
allowed to hang around.
So he got a new young guy, and he hadn't been around Elisha much. Maybe he hadn't been around prophets very much. But the prophet says, don't be afraid. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Let me read that again. Don't be afraid. Those who are with us are more than those who are with them. This little guy had to be looking around the room, wondering if he had had a stroke in the night. And Elisha prayed, open his eyes, Lord, so that he may see. Then the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he looked and saw the hills full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. The unseen, the invisible. He got a glimpse. He got a glimpse of what is going on all the time.
Well, sweetie, we've challenged people since we've started this. Seeing with your natural eyes or seeing with your spiritual eyes. First of all, you have to acknowledge that there is a spiritual world that exists in the exact same space where we're sitting right now.
But you know, Keith, I think when we've called it the spiritual world so long that we can't, our human brains want to put a picture to it. Yep. We want to put a picture to that unseen. We want to lift the veil for just a minute and we want to see it. If we could see it one time, don't you know that this servant for the rest of his life?
Well, I mean, what do you do with the few people who, I mean, their testimony is that these things sometimes aren't revealed to them. I mean, I've seen interviews of people who say, you know, I see angels, I see demons. I mean, what do you do with those?
I don't know, but I just feel like when you realize that the armies of heaven are on your side.
Well, that's number one. Yes.
They didn't come against other spiritual forces in this case either necessarily. They came against human forces because we see what they did with them in the very next little bit. It says that Elisha prays for the enemy to be struck with blindness, then leads them into Samaria. Now, I don't know if this blindness, I tried to look this up, but it's not really clear. I don't know if this blindness is a metaphor for he confused them as to where they were.
Or hallucination, yeah.
Or they couldn't see very well. They like got some kind of, everybody got, pink eye.
Cataract.
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure exactly how that played out, but they didn't even recognize Elisha because Elisha told them, this is not the road and this is not the city. Y'all in the wrong place.
And I will lead you to the man you are looking for.
He said, I know where he is. I'll take you. So he takes them to Samaria, which is the very place that they could be overtaken and killed by the king's forces. He just led them into an ambush if he wanted. And after they entered the city, he said, Lord, open the eyes of these men so they can see. Then the Lord opened their eyes and they looked around and they were inside Samaria.
Well, the fact that Elisha had to pray for their eyes to be open, he was speaking in terms of whatever spiritual force had been applied to those soldiers. It took Elisha to pray for it to be reversed. So, again, it's supernatural. I mean, it's what we challenge our listeners and viewers. Do you believe the Bible or do you not?
Yeah.
Because the Bible is full of these invisible things.
Invisible until it's visible.
Mm-hmm.
And, you would think, okay, they're done. They're done for. They're going to kill them now. But we see that instead of killing them, Elisha commands Israel's king to feed them and send them home, which brings a temporary peace, which I thought was, it's hard to.
That's a foreshadowing. Jesus taught, love your enemies, do good to those who despitefully use you. Paul said the same thing. By you blessing those that hate you, you heap coals of fire on their heads. So to me, this is a foreshadowing of what's taught as a New Testament Christian principle, rather than the eye for an eye principle.
Yeah, and I didn't write it. I didn't put the scripture here. I did most of it, but probably should have, because part of what it says there is the king actually asked Elisha. He says, "What do I do with these people? Do I kill them? Do I kill them?" And he says, "No." He said, "Could you really think of it this way?" He tells the king this. He says, "Could you go out there with your own sword and just kill one of them? They're probably all standing there looking kind of dumb, And the king says no, and he says, "Then let's feed them. Have a feast, feed them, send them home," and it does bring temporary peace. But again,
it doesn't last.
It's only temporary. The king of Aram besieges Samaria and causes a severe famine. You might be able to speak to this better than I am, Keith, because I know that armies besieging an area and surrounding it, taking all the resources, not allowing people to come and go, I'm assuming.
They're stuck with whatever happened to be there when the army got there and surrounded the city.
Right.
Because
and it said it lasted so long that it caused a severe famine.
It's just like a blockade, a blockade by ships, where they blockade the ports of a enemy nation to not let goods go in, not let important people or important goods to come out.
I mean, you eventually eat all the canned peas in the cabinet. You if this happens, this is where you keep all that stuff at the back of the pantry. You've eaten all that. It's all gone, and there's no way to have any more. So people do resort to extreme desperation. In this case, it even talks about cannibalism. Sometime later, Ben-Hadad, king of Aram, mobilized his entire army, that's sizable, his entire army, not just a company of men, and marched up and laid siege to Samaria. And there was a great famine in the city. The siege lasted so long that a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver and a quarter of a cab of seed pods for 5 shekels. There are different translations here, but I was going to tell you, let's see if I can find it. Sorry, my nose is bothering me. The illustration here, number one thing that I wanted to point out is that, that donkey's head has got to be the nastiest, least desirable food possible.
And
with
no
the least
meat.
Nutritional value. It's a big old bone. With
no meat, a
on
bone and skin,
and maybe some brains or
a couple eyeballs, the tongue. Maybe that's about it.
Nasty, just nasty.
Yeah.
And it was also considered unclean for a Jew.
Mm-hmm.
So this was an unclean animal's head, which would be the part they would definitely discard and throw away, even if they were eating the donkey. Is selling for 80 shekels of silver. 80 shekels of silver. 2 pounds of silver. 2
Mhm.
pounds. Okay, and we're going to see a contrast to that here in just a minute. So that's absolutely crazy for that to be that high. People are starving.
Well, yeah, that passage actually brings out two important things. One, uh, uh, scarcity increases prices, and both of those things are shown there. I mean, it's like you said, you're not gonna worry about what the head of a donkey costs, as long as you still can eat the rest of his body. So
Yeah.
the fact that they're now down to trying to measure, the price of a donkey's head tells you everything else.
The fact that they're even selling it
Exactly.
as consumable.
Yeah, that tells you how dire things have gotten.
Yeah. And so a woman cries out to the king for help, and the king replies, "If the Lord does not help you, where can I get help for you? From the threshing floor," meaning there's no grain. "From the wine press, there are no grapes." Then he asked her, "What's the matter?" And she answered, "This woman said to me, 'Give up your son so we may eat him today, and tomorrow we'll eat my son.' So we cooked my son and ate him. And the next day I said to her, 'Give up your son so we may eat him.' But she had hidden him." That's horrible.
I mean, can you imagine?
Mm-mm,
Can you
no.
imagine?
And it says, when the king heard the woman's words, he tore his robes. And as he went along the wall, the people looked and they saw that under his robes, he had sackcloth on his body. In other words, I'm thinking that he was praying and fasting and wearing sackcloth. And those were some of the things that the Jews did when they were trying to appeal to God for an answer to prayer or to humble themselves.
Now remember, this is the evil king. This is king of Israel, not the southern kingdom. This is northern kingdom.
You know what, Keith? I think if he'd have been really serious about all that, he wouldn't have had his priestly robes on over the sackcloth.
Yeah,
Still
he
trying to
wouldn't.
give a
He would have been going around tearing down the Asherah poles and
Mhm.
destroying the altars to Baal and Molech, and the fact that woman, those two women, thought killing and eating your kids was an okay thing to do. Tells you just what the state of apostasy is in this place and time in the northern kingdom.
Donna made the point. I was saying that there are other translations of the seed pods. That was dove poop. Yep. Guess who the king blames? Yeah, he can't exactly get to God, but he says, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if the head of Elisha, son of Shaphat, remains on his shoulders today. I'm going to cut his head off." That's what he says.
Before the sun goes down.
Oh, yeah. Now, Elisha was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him, and the king sent a messenger ahead. But before he arrived, Elisha said to the elders, "Don't you see how this murderer is sending someone to cut off my head? Look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold it shut against him. It's not the sound of his master's footsteps behind him." While he was still talking to them, the messenger came down to him. The king said, "This disaster." Do you think that the entire quote is the king said, or the king actually comes in and says this, Keith?
Well,
I'm curious.
later on, I think it ties it together.
Okay. The king said, "This disaster's from the Lord. Why should I wait for the Lord any longer?" I guess he's going to take it out on his anointed. But Elisha has a prophecy of deliverance. He says that by the next day, food will be plentiful and affordable in Samaria. And this is the scripture. Elisha replied, "Hear the word of the Lord. This is what the Lord says. About this time tomorrow, a seah of the finest flour will sell for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria." So if we want to know now what those prices are, this illustration to just drive home the point, about how much that donkey's head was. Elisha's saying that 12 pounds of flour will sell for about 2/5 of an ounce of silver, and a 20-pound bag of barley for the same amount. 2/5 of an ounce. We were paying 2 pounds of silver for a donkey's head. And now the finest flour and barley is going to be available at pennies.
Giveaway prices.
Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. The officer on whose arm the king was leaning said to the man of God, look, and he's being super sarcastic here. Even if the Lord should open the floodgates of heaven, this couldn't happen. And Elisha says, you will see it with your own eyes, but you will not eat any of it.
All right, stop right there. Go back to that slide. Go back to it. Yeah. See where it says the officer on whose arm the king was leaning? That indicates that the king actually was following his messenger. And the king and his court, the officer on whose arm the king was leaning, well, that's somebody in the king's court.
To me, this is kind of like the picture I get of this is, the king shows up, but there's an officer right there. There's like his number one bodyguard official.
Oh, yeah, that's what I say, that, his entourage.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
His closest. Yeah. Okay.
But I bet he wasn't wearing a blue T-shirt, though.
I thought that was funny.
Oh, I can't see that.
And if you can go find a picture of a disgusted Israelite captain of the guard, go try to get AI to create you one too. It's not pretty sometimes.
I bet.
Okay. What do we have to lose? Is what this is about. There were 4 men with leprosy at the entrance of the city gate. And, we talked about this just recently, Keith, that people with skin diseases, as far as the Jews go,
they were unclean. They were outcast.
So they were at the entrance of the city gate, meaning they were not allowed in. So they're not even able to buy a donkey's head if they had any money.
Outside the gate is where they sat and begged.
Mm-hmm.
But
so
in a famine, a siege created famine, the coins dropping in their tin cup probably wasn't were probably changed to rocks and stones in their tin cups.
Yeah, people didn't have anything to share. They are alive, but barely. And they say to each other, why stay here until we die? If we say we'll go into the city, the famine's there and we'll die, even if they snuck in. It says, and if we stay here, we're going to die. So let's go over to the camp of the Arameans and surrender. If they spare us, we'll live. If they kill us, then we die. We were going to die anyway. We have a chance. So when they reach the enemy camp, Keith, they find it completely abandoned. Read that for me right there and let me rest my voice for a second.
Okay. At dusk, they got up and went to the camp of the Arameans. When they reached the edge of the camp, no one was there. For the Lord had caused the Arameans to hear the sound of chariots and horses and a great army. So they said to one another, look, the king of Israel has hired the Hittite and Egyptian kings to attack us. In other words, they were so overwhelming that the sound of the attacking army was so overwhelming, it just struck fear in them. And they believed that there were so many of them that the king of Israel must have allied with the Hittites and the Egyptians to swell the ranks of their military soldiers. So they got up and fled in the dusk and abandoned their tents and their horses and donkeys. They left the camp as it was and ran for their lives. Now, if that's not just another supernatural event, I mean, it's
and you're going to, and let's keep going. You're going to find out they don't just run, they run.
The men who had leprosy reached the edge of the camp, entered one of the tents and ate and drank. Then they took silver, gold, clothes, and went off and hid them. They returned and entered another tent, took the same things, took some things from it and hid them also. Then they said to each other, What we're doing is not right. This is a day of good news, and we are keeping it to ourselves. If we wait until daylight, punishment will overtake us. Let's go at once and report this to the royal palace.
It's kind of like they said, if we wait much longer, we're going to be in trouble.
We're going to get blamed for something. We're going to be accused of something. Let's do something different. So they did.
So they went and called out to the city gatekeepers and told them, we went into the Aramean camp and no one was there. Not a sound of anyone, only tethered horses and donkeys, and the tents left just as they were. And the gatekeepers shouted the news, and it was reported within the palace. But guess what? The king thinks it's got to be a trap.
Well,
he says they're hiding over there in those woods. They're going to wait for us to come down there, and then they're going to kill us.
Other examples. He was always he was paranoid. That's what evil does to somebody. It doesn't just those dark forces sitting on your shoulder, whispering in your ear. They're not just telling you sinful things to do. They lie to you. They've got you scared of your own shadow. And so here we go.
Yeah. It says, an officer speaks up and says, what do we have to lose here? He says, have some men take 5 of the horses that are left in the city. You notice it says 5 of the horses that are left in the city. Where do you think the rest of the horses are, Keith?
That's probably all the horses that literally were left in the city that hadn't been killed.
They ate them.
Yeah.
They ate those horses. Their plight will be like those of the Israelites left here. Yes, they will be only be like all these Israelites who are doomed. I mean, that's exactly what he's saying. We don't have anything to lose. We're doomed anyway. So let's send 5 of them and 5 horses out there and find out what happened. So they're gone. They are gone. They followed them as far as the Jordan, and they found the whole road strewn with the clothing and equipment the Arameans had thrown away in their headlong flight. So the messengers returned and reported to the king. The people plundered the abandoned camp and fulfill Elisha's prophecy of food abundance. And it says, so a seah of the finest flour sold for a shekel, and 2 seahs of barley sold for a shekel, as the Lord had said, just exactly like he said, 2.5 ounces for 12 pounds of flour or 20 pounds of barley. The doubting officer is trampled to death at the city gate, and the prophecy comes true. He sees the fulfillment, but he does not partake, just as Elisha prophesied. I got his toes on there. That's an AI picture.
I love it.
I didn't know. So we've kind of gone through these, the glimpses that we have had into the unseen realm. In just these 2 chapters, we've seen an axe head float. The secret plans of kings are known to God. I mean, there wasn't a listening device in that room. There wasn't a mole. God was in that room. He heard the plans of the king. That's how Elisha knew. The forces of heaven with the chariots of fire are at the ready to do battle for us. They have their own battles going on. I think you're going to talk a little bit about that later on, about Daniel 10. But, these chariots showed up for Elisha. They showed up to promote God's purpose. Elisha wasn't supposed to die at the hands of them right then, and he wasn't going to. And God can use blindness and confusion to perfect his plans. And we saw that 2 times. We saw that, where he blinded the troops, and then they led them into there was a couple of things we saw there. God's not reacting to anything. He knows the future and is in control of it. I think that's, there's several little extras that are put in there that Elisha will say, well, this is what's going to happen. Just like that guy says, you're not going to get to partake of it. Just in case y'all didn't think God was behind this, let me tell you something else. You're not going to get to have any. So, I mean, it's just like the little nails in the coffins of the, oh, this could have happened without God, or this could have done, or this could have done, you can see that, in the scripture. I think your part, I had written these down, but you go ahead and I think you've got some things you wanted to talk about. Other places in the Bible where we see the invisible realm, we see the spiritual world at work.
Yeah. Now, let me say this. We've mentioned some really great men of God, Chuck Missler being one, Derek Gilbert being another, and there are others. But one who really has he's passed away recently. He passed away of cancer, but he was a unbelievable student of Hebrew and the Bible, and he was a 15-year Bible college professor before he ever understood what the unseen realm is all about. And a colleague of his, excuse me, encouraged him because, he said in seminary they weren't taught. He said what they were taught about angels, demons, powers and principalities. He said, I didn't get one semester hour. He said, my entire seminary experience, I had one clock hour where I had a professor try to talk about that. He said, there I was at what most people would have said was a Bible teaching, Bible-based seminary. So he spent the rest of his life, and his principal book is called The Unseen Realm. His name is Dr. Michael Heiser. I think the last time I mentioned him, I said Dr. Michael Heisner, but that's not right. It's Michael Heiser. Start with the book or video called The Unseen Realm, and it will be very revealing to you. Okay. But this is where there was so much where Sonora and I would talk about, well, we don't understand that, we'd blow right through it. We don't understand this over here, we'd just blow right through it. But like we told you about,
Keith, we didn't really realize we were blowing through it.
No.
Your brain does that. If you don't, and I've said this before, you'll see a word, you'll learn a new word and add it to your vocabulary. And then you'll hear that word 10 times in the next month. And you're like, why does that word keep popping up? That word was always there. You were just letting it go. And I think once you know some of these things, you look back through, and as we're going back through the Old Testament, we're like, it's all here.
Yeah.
What were you thinking they were talking about?
Well, because most preachers avoid any preaching or teaching or discussion of supernatural spiritual things.
I don't think all of them do, but I think all of the ones we grew up with in the Southern Baptist Church did. Let's say that. It's
not just unique to the Southern Baptist. It's the culture of church. Everything needs to be comfortable. The buildings need to be air conditioned. The pews need to have cushions on them. Preaching can only last for 30 minutes. And by gosh, people start getting that.
I don't want you to get on that soapbox. You go ahead and start with this.
All right. Well, let's do this. Let's talk about some of these things that are in the Bible that most people never bring up, never discuss, never promote, never highlight. So Daniel chapter 4, and this is if y'all recall, this is Daniel when Nebuchadnezzar learned that he was going to be suffering from a temporary mental illness, but it's going to last for 7 years. And what was the effect of that mental illness? He was going to be cursed to behave like a grazing animal. He will start walking on his hands and knees and eating grass for 7 years. This is how he's going to suffer, because he was a prideful, haughty man. And so, starting with chapter 4 of Daniel, verse 13, and this is Nebuchadnezzar saying this now. I saw in the visions of my head as I lay in bed, and behold, a watcher. The word is IR, ear, and it literally is translated a watcher or holy messenger. A holy one came down from heaven. The sentence, the Hebrew word there is pitgam, means edict or decree. Now, folks, here's what you need to understand. A watcher is in some circles a very old term. It's very well understood. It's very it's not a foreign word that people haven't heard. Now, I'm going to tell you this. Until probably 15 years ago, Sonara and I had never heard of what's a watcher in the Bible. What a watcher? What? Well, it turns out a lot of the Jewish scripture talking about Old Testament themes and teachings and stuff they learned from the books of Moses. A watcher was a very well-known term. And so when the Hebrew word ear is used, it literally means watcher. That was a label that was put on these particular supernatural beings. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones. The holy ones, the word there is kadis, which means holy or pure ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High, Ele is the Hebrew word there, and it's literally another title like El Shaddai, Jehovah. I mean, you just there's what, like 20 something different titles for Jehovah God. Well, Ele is another one, and it literally means Most High, meaning, you know, there is no other like Jehovah. Rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men. Now, we could go for weeks on end trying to decipher the meaning of just that last phrase there, but we won't. The point I'm trying to make is the concept is called the divine counsel.
Hey,
And
Keith, let me
go ahead.
read that. Let me read that sentence without the explanation, just so
translation?
that I think it's hard for people to follow with all that. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men.
Yeah.
So what is the sentence? What is before that? What is it talking about? The sentencing, as in you are going to spend time in jail, that kind of sentence?
That's exactly what that word sentence.
I think that's confusing. It means the judgment, the sentence.
Yeah, well,
by the decree of the watchers. The decision to the end. And what is to the end? Would you say that means? To the end.
Say Elah literally means verdict.
The verdict to the end, that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men.
Okay, and the sentence or the verdict, okay, what is significant about that? It's a decision that has the force of law behind it. Meaning, we're not throwing out their hypothetical concepts. We're saying you have been judged. You're going to walk on all all fours. You're going to eat grass like an animal. You're a man. You used to be the king of Babylonia, but king of Babylon, but you were too prideful. You were too haughty, and so this is the judgment that the watchers decided. Now, Jehovah God, we learn from Psalms 82, which we'll see in just a second. Jehovah is Jehovah. There is no other like Jehovah, the great I am. He created all of the watchers. They are B'nai Elohim. They are sons of God. Okay? But does he have to let them help him rule? No, he doesn't have to. But apparently he chose to. Okay? I didn't make this up. This is Daniel chapter 4. Okay? Now, that was 13 and 17.
What sentence is it talking about there, Keith?
The
What
sentence,
verdict?
the curse.
The curse over
on
the angels.
Nebuchadnezzar.
Oh,
yeah.
the one on Nebuchadnezzar. Okay. I got
Yeah.
you. Okay. When Nebuchadnezzar was made to, wander the fields and eat grass like a grazing animal, it says this verdict is because that's what the watchers decided. He let them decide on the sentence. And it's to know, so that the human beings will know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men.
One of my favorite sayings, and it's a simple one, but it's so true. God is God, and we ain't.
And he rules how he chooses. He will set over it who he will, and if he wants to set the lowliest of men over, then that's his business. He is God.
Exactly. That was the message of it. All right. The one at the top is ESV. The one at the bottom is New King James. Just to show you how it's translated differently. But again, there was a watcher in verse 13. By the decree of the watchers. How many of you before tonight had ever heard the phrase watcher or watchers, meaning holy heavenly beings? Okay. Until 15 years ago, I had never heard the phrase. I had no idea it was even in my Bible.
Well, Keith, I know you've never seen it, but there's a movie, and it's a very controversial movie, but about where Noah's making the ark and the watchers come and help. And they're these giant beings. They're supernatural beings and that are walking on the earth, to assist man at the time. And when I saw that for the very first time, I thought that was nuts. And I don't think that's necessarily accurate, but I can see where they got that.
Well, it's like I said, the term watcher, the word ear, IR, in Hebrew is a very commonly used Hebrew reference to angelic beings, to supernatural holy beings.
They are. I was just trying to make
realm.
that comment that a lot of the younger people may have seen that, and that may be where they were introduced to that, Keith.
Okay, that's
what
a good
I was
point.
talking about.
That was a good point. Well, the problem is the word watcher, and the reason I was alluding back to what you were saying, the word watcher is not used, but just a couple of places right here, if I'm not mistaken, right here in Daniel's the only place it's used. Okay. And that would be just like Peter, when Peter talks about the fallen angels being condemned to Tartarus. Well, in Peter, in his book, I mean, the word literally is Tartarus. It's the only place in the Bible where, in the New Testament, where the name of what I call super hell is used. But in other Greek literature and in other Aramaic literature of the time of Jesus, Tartarus was a well-used word. It was a well-known concept. Similar to just what we're seeing here. The fact that watcher is only used twice in the Bible doesn't mean that the culture didn't have a much broader, a much more in-depth understanding of what a watcher was. Okay. Oh. There we go.
Everybody's clicking.
Sorry.
You're on 10 minutes. 10 minutes
All
left.
right. Trying to go through. Daniel is visited by an angel. Now, some commentators say that it's Gabriel from chapter 9. Well, other commentators say, well, if it was Gabriel and he was mentioned in chapter 9, well, why wouldn't Daniel have said what the guy's name was in chapter 10? Don't know. I wasn't there to ask. But start with verse 5. I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a certain man clothed in linen, whose waist was girded with gold of Uphaz, the sound of his words like the voice of a multitude. And I, Daniel, alone saw the vision, for the men who were with me did not see the vision, but a great terror fell upon them, so that they fled to hide themselves. Therefore, I was left alone when I saw this great vision. All right, there you go. That's another one of those times.
A glimpse of the invisible.
Yep.
A glimpse of the invisible. And they probably fled to hide themselves from the look on his face, realizing he was seeing something they weren't seeing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, they were probably like, I don't know what it is, but I ain't staying. So,
and he said to me, O Daniel, man, greatly loved, understand the words that I speak to you and stand upright, for I have now been sent to you. Do not fear, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart to understand and to humble yourself before your God, your Elohim, your words were heard, and I have come because of your words. But the prince, and I want to make this point, prince, the use of the Hebrew there is S-A-R. Now, folks, we've told you, Sonar and I, we don't even want to think we can claim we can pronounce stuff right, but it's S-A-R, and it means ruler. But where it's used and how it's used repeatedly lets you know that Sar has a special significance. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. And behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, what's the word there? Sar, came to help me, for I had been left alone there with the kings, Melech, meaning divine ruler of Persia. Now I have come to make you understand what will happen to your people in the latter days, for the vision refers to many days yet to come. Now, what was Michael referred to? A Sar. What is Michael? We know he's one of the archangels. So what is the word Sar in Hebrew signifying? Supernatural, little g, Elohim. Okay? But now I will return to fight against this, and this is going on to verse 20 in chapter 10. But now I will return to fight against the prince, again, Sar, prince of Persia. And when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends by my side against these except Michael, your what? Your Sar, your prince. Now, like I said, we know Michael is an angel. He's an angelic being. He's a little g. He's a B'nai Elohim.
So what we're seeing here, to me, I mean, what is something that I was talking about earlier, there is a war going on in the spiritual realm. They're not all on the same side anymore. I mean, we know that. We can see that. So we get a few, this is a glimpse into that invisible world. This is something that we can know.
Yes.
And when you know that there's more to it than just what you can see, I mean, I'm not really talking about faith, but I am. It changes how you live your life.
It humbles you.
If you know that you have the kingdom of heaven behind you, how can you fail? It may look like failure. You may be blinded and being led into something. I mean, but God is in control. We can have confidence.
And that's where our trust has to be placed.
Mm-hmm.
I go back to Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. trust in the Lord with all thine heart. In all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy paths. Trust him with everything. Trust him with everything. Now, folks, we've got much more, but I don't want to belabor the thing. This particular point.
This is basically where he said, "I've been trying to come to you for days."
Mm-hmm.
I heard
days
you.
To be exact.
I heard you when you called, and
I was dispatched as soon as your heart got right. I was dispatched to come to you.
This is how long it's taken me to get there, in human terms.
Because I was hindered by the prince of Persia. Well, he certainly cannot be talking about a human.
He's not
contrarian.
Of course not. And we don't know why he was hindered. Was there another battle he had to fight before he could let loose? He does say that he ain't got any help except Michael.
Mm-hmm. It took Michael to get him free so he could come on and do what he was dispatched to do. Now, folks,
we don't think about this. We don't. Can we
make a movie out of this? Can we make a blockbuster movie out of these stories from the Old Testament?
You'd be surprised how many people have used the Old Testament to draw from for science fiction and fantasy, where you have supernatural forces, and you'd be surprised. Okay, you want to go on to the next slide because we're going to run out of time.
Yeah. All right. Acts chapter 9. We're going to back up to Acts 8 first. Do y'all remember what happened in Acts chapter 7? Acts chapter 7 is where Stephen was stoned to death. Okay? And who held the coats of those throwing the stones when Stephen was stoned to death? Paul was. Okay? Then chapter 8, here's what it says about Paul. And there arose on that day a great persecution against the church in Jerusalem, and they were scattered throughout the regions of Judea and Samaria, except the apostles. Devout men buried Stephen and made great lamentation over him. But Saul, that's what Paul's name was before he had his Damascus Road experience. But Saul was ravaging the church and entering house after house. He dragged off men and women and committed them to prison. This is what the apostle Paul, before he became saved by direct confrontation with the Messiah, was doing. Okay, now instead of being a warrior for God, he was being a warrior against the church. All right, that's Acts chapter 8. This is Acts chapter 9. This is what's important. But Saul, still breathing threats and murder against the disciples of the Lord, went to the high priest and asked him for letters to the synagogue at Damascus, so that if he found any belonging to the way, and I don't know, some of you may realize that from time to time, I'll ask somebody, "Hey, are you a member of the way? Do you follow the way?" Well, in case y'all didn't know it, the way is the way the church was referred to. Followers of Jesus were referred to as members of, quote, the way in the days of the early church. So that if he found any belonging to the way, men or women, and this is not the only place that phrase is used, by the way. I think also Acts chapter 22, maybe. Men or women, he might bring them bound to Jerusalem. Now, as he went on his way, he approached Damascus, and suddenly a light from heaven shone around him. And falling to the ground, he heard a voice saying to him, "Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me?" And he said, "Who are you, Lord?" And he said, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. But rise and enter the city, and you will be told what you are to do." The men who were traveling with him stood speechless, hearing the voice, but seeing no one. Saul rose from the ground, and although his eyes were opened, he saw nothing. So they led him by the hand and brought him into Damascus. And for 3 days he was without sight, and neither ate nor drank. How many of you have heard people talk about a supernatural thing that happened to them? And they were saved at those times. I have heard a few testimonies like that in my 69 years on this earth. Okay. So are they true? I don't know. I can't testify to their truthfulness, but knowing the people who told those testimonies, I'm sure not going to say I'm qualified to judge them. Now, Deuteronomy is your source for all things little g gods. And I'm not going to hit them because we're running out of time. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, y'all know what this is. This is the scattering of the nations. Where after the Tower of Babel, this is Deuteronomy 32:8-9. You've heard us refer to it many times, so I'm not going to repeat it. But let's go to Deuteronomy chapter 4. And beware lest you raise your eyes to heaven, and when you see the sun and the moon and the stars, all the host of heaven, and the Hebrew words there are Samayim Seba, literally means heavenly host. Well, that's not talking about the sun, moon, and the stars, because those are separately identified. Heavenly host is literally talking about angelic beings in the supernatural realm. You be drawn away and bow down to them and serve them, things that the Lord your God has allotted. The word for allotted is halak, which means a portion, divide, assign, to all the peoples under the whole heaven. But the Lord has taken you and brought you out of the iron furnace, out of Egypt, to be a people of his own inheritance. And folks, I'm going to encourage you. It's like we've said before. God said what he meant, and he meant what he said in the Hebrew and the Greek. It really helps you if you can go and study what those words are, because you will start seeing that those Hebrew words appear multiple times. And you will get a sense of what the significance of that Hebrew word is when, and again, the online services that Sonara uses and I use, we can pull up, how many would you say, Sonara? 70, 80 different translations of the Bible in English?
We can. We aren't able to pull up the translations for all those in Greek and Hebrew, but if we
Greek
use
and Hebrew
the
doesn't
NIV,
change. Yeah.
I mean NIV, we can and relate it back and forth. And I would say question things that you there will be, the Holy Spirit will help you when you start doing this. And there will be things that you'll think that, now what do they mean when they say that? And just being able to go to those translations really sheds a lot of light on that sometimes. And we don't have adequate words sometimes for these translations. It's the best word we have for it. It's not necessarily even wrong. It's just, it's not quite what was meant by that word. There's no way to do it. I don't know any other way to do it. Now we do pay a little bit for Bible Gateway subscription, but it's been worth it for us.
The free version of Bible Gateway gives you all the translations, but it does not give you the Hebrew and Greek. If you pay a little bit of a premium, you do get the Hebrew and Greek in Bible Gateway. We use it. We love it.
There may be other ways to do it that are free. It says, Donna says that the blue letter Bible, choose King James Version and then turn on the Strong's numbers, and it shows all the words that are Greek and Hebrew translated.
And that's good.
Okay, well, that's another option.
It's just
right there.
So few people have the King James nowadays, and that's why we skip around between the English Standard Bible, the NIV, and the New King James. And we skip around, but from time to time we've shown y'all where the translation from Greek or Hebrew into the English it lacked. It just didn't hit the mark.
Mhm.
And so that's why it's important. All right.
Keith, we're
Deuteronomy
kind
7.
of running out of time here.
Okay.
You want to do let me show you something real quick. Can we do a condensed version right here and talk about these? We've talked about Daniel 10 and said, do not be afraid. Since the first day you set your mind to gain understanding. Remember, we talked about that one. And then you talked about Psalm 82, which is the divine counsel. And just to be able to really, sum up what that psalm talks about, I think the verse that spoke to me and really got my attention was God presides in the great assembly and he renders judgment among the gods. And that's where it's talking about his, his overseeing of people that he puts in charge, and he judges them and says, you're not doing things the way that you're supposed to be doing them. So you're going to die like men.
Well, in the very last verse, that verse 8 is where the psalmist implores God to judge the little g gods and reclaim the nations for yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And we've talked about that. When did that start? Well, that started the day of Pentecost.
But in our theme of, the glimpse of the invisible, these are all places. And then even in the New Testament, of course, Ephesians 6:12, and I start with 10, but finally be strong in the Lord and in his mighty power. Put on the full armor of God so that you can take your stand against the devil's schemes. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of the dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. I don't know how you can get any plainer than that.
Mm-hmm.
That's the New Testament.
And that's the thing about it. Paul was as aware of all of this stuff that came out of Deuteronomy, Daniel, First, Second Kings, all the things we've touched on, the miracles of the Exodus, the battle of Aaron and Moses in the court of Pharaoh, between the Pharaoh's prophets and of their gods versus Aaron. And Paul was familiar with all that. I mean, this is what he had spent 40 years at the foot of Gamaliel doing, is learning all this.
Exactly.
And so when he writes Ephesians 6:12, that's exactly what he's talking about. He's not speaking hypothetically. He's saying, look, this is our culture. This is the history of mankind. This is the history of the world. These things are real. So understand that, and this is what I'm going to say to end our service tonight. I have no power. I'm a human. God made us. He added Eve to the mix. We were special. We were a special creation of his. Adam was B'nai Elohim. He was a direct creation of God. But the rest of us are B'nai Adam. We are creations from Adam. Therefore, we're human. We are limited by the physical world. So when God imbues one of his people with supernatural power, it's only as God ordains it. Elijah, Elisha, Jesus, Paul. Just go on. How many? Aaron, Moses, Joshua, Gideon. It was because God imbued supernatural power on them for specific purposes, for specific times, under specific circumstances. I can tell you right now, I have no power. I am just a sinner saved by grace. But I'm not fooled into thinking that I know the one who controls, who created the universe, who controls everything, who created everything. The demons tremble at his name. They recognize him by sight. Well, guess what? He's on my side. Sonara, I quit talking.
I can't believe that.
I did.
I think I'm thinking, how we live our lives. There is no, we have no power of our own, but there is power in who we know and his authority.
Oh, one of those great hymns, Power in the Blood.
Yeah. And I'm very thankful. I'm very thankful. And, it confounds the wise. And, there are a few verses I've been looking at a lot lately, and how God does things is so surprising and amazing. And all of these stories that I think we've looked at tonight, where the veil was lifted, where we can see that this world exists. There's somebody out there, though, that they need to, we've gone down the rabbit trail pretty far here. We're understanding this and we're getting into it, but I've been in the place, and I know you have too, where we were barely recognizing that there was another realm, that there was another a spiritual realm that coincides with our realm.
We're too smart to be fooled by somebody claiming supernatural this or supernatural that.
Yeah,
there's a logical explanation for everything.
Even those of us that did, I think we looked at it and said, well, that's separate from us. That doesn't really have anything to do with us, other than angel might help me if, I'm about to be in a car wreck. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I just don't think that we have not embraced all the players, and we are limited in our human capacity to see any of this unless the veil is lifted. But these stories in the Bible, we can know that this is happening, and this is still happening. This is not something that quit, that stopped.
Yeah.
And to be able to apply that.
And that's just like we were talking about, the U.S. was a Christian nation. Well, what have we allowed to happen? Instead of us continuing to keep out Baal and Molech and Ashtoreth, we've gotten God out of the city square. We've gotten God out of the schools. We've gotten God out of the colleges and universities. Who was it? I can't remember now. We were talking about the fact that, growing up, the culture of church, we were the we were the majority, and those who didn't go to church or believe in God or speak in terms of spiritual things, those were the odd ones out. Well, now, I never thought I'd see it in my lifetime, but my kids and my grandkids, they're going to suffer if they're Christians. They're going to be targeted if they're Christians. They're going to be shunned if they're Christians. And that is us, instead of maintaining what started on the day of Pentecost. I mean, who do you think's behind the killing of millions of babies a year? Who do you think is behind the confusion of the sexual identities? Whatever Ashtoreth could do to keep humanity from procreating, that was her purpose. Well, what do we have in this country now? All right. And then you talk about Baal. Our culture does not like the open and free expression of anything to do with Jehovah God or the name Jesus Christ. It makes people's blood boil. It makes people go crazy. Well, who was the great usurper? Who was the great opposer? Satan, the opposer. Okay, Satan, Baal. So there you have it. That's what we have in our country. Just like Jonathan Cahn said, the dark trinity has basically come out of hiding. They've come out of the woodwork. They're not in the shadows anymore. So
Barbara was talking about, Keith, how astounding it is that the churches avoid talking about the spiritual realm. And that's exactly what I was talking about, that we're to the point where we should be not babes in Christ. We should be engaging with that in mind, engaging the world with the spiritual realm in mind. as part of our arsenal. But we're having to back up so far. Something's happened, and we're having to back up so far to even mention that it exists, and that we can, through the Bible, lift the veil a little bit and see behind the curtain to get an idea of what we're dealing with right now. What we're dealing with right now. And I know we can't go much longer, Keith, because it is 15 minutes over, and we got so much we want to say. We was just getting wound up, but we got to go.
All right. Love y'all. Good night. Thank
Love
y'all
everybody.
for joining us. We had a good crowd tonight.
Good night.